perished on purpose. God was willing that they perish. They didn't find grace in the eyes of the Lord at any given time. As we've said before, it would look kind of weird if Noah threw out this banner after everybody was drowning and says, "Smile, God loves you." Because those people that were perishing did not find grace in the eyes of God. And Noah was no different than them. And neither are we any different from the non-elect in who we are by nature. It says that in Philippians 2, or Ephesians 2. All right. The next question, it's kind of related a little bit. And there's a part B to this too that's kind of trickles down in relationship to it. So here it is. Is the new creature in Christ, in other words, the believer, the one that is considered saved, one that's justified and sanctified, is the new creature, the believer, entitled to things from God? Now I know that word entitled is some people are scared of that. I mean, politically we look at entitlement programs, and it's usually sometimes a disparaging term dealing with maybe people that don't want to work and they get stuff, right? You go wild on some politics there. But in this idea of the people of God who are chosen, who God has saved and given faith to, given spiritual life to, are they entitled to things or anything from God? I've got some verses here just for us to think about. So let me back up. I'll give you a little spoiler here, a related note at the end, and we'll come back and answer this at the end. We talked about in the 1 John messages, is mercy obligated? So you kind of see a little relationship between asking that question. Is mercy obligated? And do believers have entitlements? Well, on the question, is mercy obligated, we'll go a little further. Is it obligated to anybody? You could say elect or non-elect. We'll come back and answer that. But go back up to the entitlement idea. Ephesians, I'm going to read 4 verses. Ephesians 1:3. Now I'm going to read some things that talks about that the elect are given. So in that question is still there. Are they entitled to those things? Anything that we're talking about that's given. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. This is Ephesians 1:3. Who blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenlies in Christ. Now, some of these verses I'm going to read have a broader context. We don't have time to go into detail about every single thing surrounding, what all this includes in all these verses. I'm not going to do it today. We've touched on some of these things before, but here it says, who blessed us with every spiritual blessing in Christ, in the heavenlies in Christ. So this is whatever this is, some stuff given to God's people. Are they entitled to it? Are they going to get it? Should they receive it? How are they to feel do they feel weird about receiving it? Wasn't it provided through grace by something that God had done in a powerful way to secure these things so that they can be given and received? Answering some questions with some questions, right? Am I allowed doing that? 2 Peter 1:3. According as his divine power has given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that has called us to glory and virtue. And I'm not going to read the rest, but there's a list after that of a bunch of things. But has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. It's connected up with how to do that with his divine power. And then there's means involved through the knowledge of him that called us. And then it gives a list. These are spiritual things. They also have to do with means. 1 Corinthians 2:12. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know, notice this, the things that are freely given to us of God. Now, this is a little bit different in that it uses an extra word or a different word that kind of goes in the direction of really my part 1 and part 2 questions. It says things that are freely given. Freely. Now you can hit that up in a two-pronged way, which is kind of even related in the two things, that God in his sovereignty freely acts in his sovereignty to give them. And also we know that as far as any form of payment, we don't buy them. Believers don't buy them. They've been purchased for us. So we don't merit them. We don't earn them. They're already paid for. They're given freely. Freely by God through his sovereignty and freely without any cost, both. When we say free and sovereign grace, we can do that two-pronged thing, both. Freely, his grace is freely given by his own will and purpose within himself, and then it's given to where we don't have to pay for it. It's been paid for. So there's some things there. Would you consider things freely given to be entitlements? Well, if you weren't entitled to them, you're not allowed to have them. I would think, if I kind of understand some of those words. And we're going to go to Romans. You can go to Romans 8 to get ready for this next one. But just a little thing about what we just said. You know how we are. Even, all right, we're trained as kids. We're trained as kids to work and be good to get things. Right? And, if you're a parent or a grandparent, some people say grandparents are different parents. Me and Becky are not different. The way we do grandparenting, we do it just like parents. We might even be a little bit stricter. But when it comes to like spoiling kids versus not spoiling kids, you're not going to let a kid run roughshod over the laws of your house or whatever. You're not going to let them destroy your house and disrespect you and then just give them everything in the world, just like, because they're going to end up going to prison, right? And nobody's going to want to be around them, not even you. So that's the idea of training up a child that way. But it's different in the gospel. It's opposite in the gospel. Now, I do this to kids and grandkids because of love. God treats me a certain way because of love, but there are some differences. And I'm not trying to make my grandkids or my kids earn my love. That's not it. I'm training them as people so they can grow up to be responsible. So they're not going to starve to death, so that they can function. If they work a job, they're going to excel at a job because the raises are mostly merit raises. Right? That's the way it works in work, but not in salvation. It's the merit of another. So there's the differences there. So even after because we're trained this way all of our life by our parents, and like in school, you get brownie points or whatever, you get privileges, you get to do different things if you behave at school. And the opposite, if you misbehave, you get demerits, you get detention, expulsion, whatever. SWATs when I was in school. I didn't get any, but they gave them. Because I was a little Pharisee, I didn't get SWATs. But even after we're converted, we have to, it's weird, I think, but I think it's natural, that we have to get used to, even as we deal with one another in the church. I've told stories about how I deal with people at work, where I've told them that I wanted to give them something, and they wouldn't receive it for free. They kept pulling their wallet out. I gotta, no, stop. We're not used to that by nature. And I told one boy that was a Roman Catholic, he insisted that he pay for this certain book that he asked me to get for him. And I said, I got a copy at home, I'll give it to you for free. And he insisted, and I said, you can't have it if you pay me. I'm keeping it. Sorry, you don't get your book. He got the message. I gave him his book. He received it by grace, right? We still have problems. That residue in our minds about receiving things by grace. You know, even as a pastor, we've recently talked about some things about things I've received from the congregation. And I told you during those meetings, it's like, that's weird to me. I don't feel, I'm not in that mode because of a history of doing things a certain way. It's awkward. And so in every day, when, in the church, this is something we need to get used to, right? Is treating one another and showing grace, the kind of grace that God showed us to show one another. And this is a practical application of the grace that we've received by God in, by, and through Christ. Romans 8:32. Truly, he did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, referring to believers, talking to saints. How shall he not with him also, here it is, freely give us all things? And there's a lot of this repetitive speech throughout the New Testament, especially about God giving these things, and we're asking, are these entitlements? I say that they are. If you want to call them something different, don't use the word. If you're afraid that the word will convey something, a weird connotation, then leave it alone. But I think it's good to finally warm up to that idea. I think it glorifies God when we warm up to that idea, because it presses further the issue of salvation's by grace and not works. And we get all kind of things from this God that's shown us grace and mercy. And we ought to freely, and God-given faith does this, freely receives these things. And so some people would look to the political idea of entitlements in a bad way and say, well, they've violated these things, they've abused these things. And then they look at believers in the realm of grace and they say, look, you're just using God. He's a grandpa. You're just taking his stuff, and that's all you care about. You don't care about serving. And see, that's why people might be afraid of that idea of entitlements and God's people, freely receiving these things that are provided. So you got to get that straight in your own minds, and it might not be easy. And we kind of talk about these things as we go through whatever lessons that we do. Now, back to that question, is kind of a part B related question: is mercy obligated? Now, this kind of gets into some timing, a timing issue. Let's go back in our minds to where we've talked about several times about the eternal covenant of grace, where the Trinity agreed together about the plan and the scheme of salvation concerning the purpose of God, the glory of God in Christ and Him crucified, which included the love of God, election, predestination, so on. When that covenant took place, and we have to use human terms when we say when that covenant took place, because we've said recently there was really never a place where it happened because it was eternal. It always happened. In other words, it's always been in the mind of God. The Trinity, we kind of get jokingly here, the Trinity didn't huddle up and say, hey, I got an idea. It always was. So when that happened, which means eternally, and the people of God were loved and chosen, at that point, and again, it always has been, God obligated Himself to the elect. He obligated His mercy and His grace to the elect. That was mercy and grace, that covenant, everything about it, and Christ being chosen as the representative, and where everything was laid on His shoulder to have all of salvation conditioned on Him. That is mercy and grace. And then as time, you're talking about people that don't even have a person yet, right? And as time comes out, these people are born in each successive generation. And then that message comes about this mercy and about this grace, about this person who accomplished redemption. And then righteousness is imputed, they're regenerated, they're given faith and repentance, and it's made known to them, knowledge, understanding, and then they receive it by faith. They see it with their eyes of faith and receive it. And then it blends into those entitlements we were talking about. You're just like, you're growing in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. And you got to pinch yourself. It's like, I can't believe I'm in. Where humanly speaking, I could have been on the outskirts here. And you would even, as you're saying that, realize that the non-elect don't have mercy, and God's not obligated to show it to them. He never was. And when you see that, here's where really the cover or the fix, I think, the medicine or whatever, to keep God's people from abusing entitlements is the God-given knowledge that causes humility, that tamps down any pride or arrogance and abuse of entitlements. For the most part, I think as God's people grow, they start seeing, well, I don't use these entitlements like I even should. God has shown the person of Christ in all of His offices, and He has been made, not only came and was made in the form of a servant, but He still serves as high priest. And in all of His offices, it talks about coming to the throne of grace. How many times do we neglect that? So I'm starting to talk about those entitlements that we neglect, we forget about, maybe some that we're even ignorant of. And the Scripture is replete with saying, hey, what are you doing? Jump in these treasures. Here it is. What's the problem? So it's more that problem, I think, in God's people than abusing anything. Somebody can argue with me if they want, but I think that's the majority of it in God's people is that way. So again, don't forget about this mercy, obligated or not. Don't forget this, that His mercy is not obligated to the non-elect. It never has been, it never will be. He is not at all. He does not show mercy to them in any way, shape, or form. Never. And He never will, according to the Scripture. He has mercy on whom He'll have mercy, and He hardens whom He will. He has that divine prerogative because He's God and we're not. And again, what should that cause in us? Humility. Love to God for him showing his love to us. All right, next question. What is reprobation and why is it so offensive? Now, we got a rather large crowd today out here. The option is going to be putting the microphone out if there's questions or comments out there. And there's no pressure, but there's a chair here and there's a chair here. If nobody sits in them, I'm not penalizing anybody. I can see one guy, he's tired. I know he's tired. I can tell physically. So maybe that's why one of these chairs is not filled. We have a guy that was traveling, two guys. One of the guys is married to my daughter, so they're hopefully watching in Tennessee right now, live stream. So there's two that possibly would be here too to answer questions. But anyway, here it is. Twofold question. What is reprobation? And part two is why is it so offensive? They're already assuming it's offensive, sounds like. So I looked up the word, and here's the thing with words in translations. I mean, you can look up the word reprobate. So it depends on what translation you look it up in. There might be 4 uses, there might be 5, depending on the translation. So then, like if you're doing Strong's, a lot of people do Strong's and concordance. And you find the Strong number, and you take the Strong number, you search that number, and a lot of times you'll find there's way more uses of the original word you didn't know because you're not doing, this way you're not doing word searches, you're doing original word search with a Strong number, and I looked that up and there was like 8 instead of 4 or 5. So there's other words used. So the definition is unapproved, rejected, cast away, and that's it right there. Or, reprobate or reject. I rejected twice. Unapproved, rejected, a castaway. Now, before we go to the part about it, why is it so offensive? Which the questioner here, I guess he assigned it as under the offensive list. And it is, of course. He assigned it to the right category. But I want to expand on this before we go any further by asking another question. Just kind of a note. Can we expand this idea of reprobation, at least in the terminology, and expand it to several other terms referring to just basically the non-elect or goats? Right? The elect are sheep, the non-elect are goats. So if we talk about reprobation, we could just as well, I think, look at texts all throughout the Scripture that talk about the non-elect, how God deals with the non-elect, the fact that there are non-elect, the fact that there's goats, how does God deal with them? So yeah, I think we could expand on that. So as we think about this idea of reprobation, I read a few verses. We well know by going through the Chosen in Christ series, we hammered on a lot of this stuff, how God deals with the non-elect. We turned over a lot of rocks, so to speak. So we're going to get into why it's so offensive. Let me read a couple verses. 2 Timothy 3:8. It uses the word reprobate. And it's talking about some dudes in the Old Testament. Janus and Jambres in Moses' time. 2 Timothy 3:8. But as Janus and Jambres withstood Moses, so these also, Paul talking to Timothy in New Testament times, so these also, talking about this crowd that's not receiving the gospel of grace, they're acting just like Janus and Jambres in Moses' time. It says, They also resist the truth. Men of corrupt mind reprobate concerning the faith. The faith of the gospel, that body of doctrine that people agree to, believe in, count on, promote, defend, right? They reject it. Their mind is corrupt in a spiritual sense. It's corrupt with self-righteousness. They're worksmongers. They're proud. They hate God. Oh, yeah, they're doing a bunch of stuff that everybody looks at and says, man, I'd like to be as religious as him. But they hate God. And Paul compared these current people to these bad guys that weren't cooperating with Moses' message. Reprobate concerning the faith. They're not believers. They're lost. They're rejected. They're castaways. They are unapproved. They're unapproved by God. Not just Paul. And these Jannes and Jambres were unapproved by God, not just Moses. So rejection of the truth is really nothing personal. And we shouldn't take it personal when we preach the gospel and they reject our message. It's God's message. They're rejecting God. Take it up with him, As long as we're telling the truth, people can take it up with God. Because we don't have any authority in and of ourselves. The authority is in the Scriptures. Titus 1:16 is another usage of the word. And here again, Paul's warning about some, religious bad guys, people in false religion. They profess, Titus 1:16, they profess that they know God. That sound familiar? They're religious. They want everybody to know. They're going to church. They have denominations. They pass out literature. They got degrees behind their names. They have titles. Maybe they're parking in the pastor's spot, whatever. There's all kind of signification. They profess that they know God, but in their works, they deny him. Now, we know that these works probably look good to religious people. Not saying these guys are, robbing banks naked while they have heroin needles sticking out their arm, having their arm around prostitutes, flipping people the bird. It's not that. I combined a lot of things there. But it's talking about the deceivableness of unrighteousness, the display of the hatred of God by competing for a righteousness by trying to establish one of their own. Being abominable and disobedient and reprobate to every good work. First of all, we know unbelievers, every single thing they do without exception is sin. They're not qualified to do a good work. They don't do good works. They talk about it. Everybody looks at them and identifies those wrongly as good works. They'll go to judgment with that plea, but Lord, didn't I do this and that? And, Christ will say the same thing that he said in Matthew 7, but here's some similar language to it. Abomination, disobedient. What is that? That's lawlessness, right? Unbelief, unrighteousness, pride, arrogance, hatred toward God. Reprobate to every good work. Just like the other verse we read, reprobate concerning the faith. Hebrews 6 is another verse that uses the word in verse 8. Hebrews 6:8. But that which bears thorns and briars, here's the word, is rejected. The word rejected, in the English word rejected is the word reprobate in the original. And is a curse. It's rejected and is a curse whose end is to be burned. I mean, you get the whole idea of the pictures, types, and shadows in Genesis. Where Adam sinned, and then there was curses delivered. What was one of the first ones? Talking about there's thorns and thistles and briars, and you got to work to plow and stuff, and it's going to be hard. The earth is cursed. We see that thorns that are showing a curse, where of course were woven into a crown and jammed into Christ's head. He became a curse for his people. So you see those pictures there of that. But you see what's tied directly to it. It's rejected. And what happened shortly after the curse came? Some kids were born. They're going to do this sacrificial system. Let's watch and see what they're doing. One of them was doing stuff from the cursed ground. He got some fruits and vegetables, presented them. His offering was cursed. And the other one was a picture of the Lord Jesus Christ, a lamb without spot or blemish. His offering was accepted because it typified Christ. You could go on and on and on, but the word rejected here in Hebrews 6:8 is the same word for reprobate. So you could go all over the scriptures and look at elect, non-elect, goats and sheep, and compare and contrast. You see the different, straight gate, wide gate, on and on and on. The comparisons and contrast between these two peoples. And when you show that contrast, and you see the only thing that made the difference is the sovereignty of God, that's when the offense comes. Like the distinguishing particular love of God. And then God looks at the reprobate or the goat or the non-elect, and all we see in the text has to do with hatred, not grace, not mercy. And so when people read that, they are offended and they question his warrant or right, his divine right to do that. And we see that questioning in and of itself is sin. That's sin because you're questioning the authority of God, the power of God, the sovereignty of God, his divine right to do as he sees fit in the purpose within himself.
Yeah, the legalists, they love the Hebrews 6:4-6.
Yeah, I noticed that was, yeah. All right, we got some people coming alive on the other side of the camera.
One thing too, Scott, I would add to that, as far as the offensiveness, is it in the Bible it talks about that it would be better in the end. It'll be better for those in Sodom and Gomorrah, and why it would be more offensive, because the people in Sodom and Gomorrah do not want a God that holds them accountable for their actions. The religious community, the Sodom and Gomorrah just flat out, there is no God, I'm not accountable to anybody. The religious community knows there's a God, a creator, but it's a God of their own imagination. So it's doubly offensive to them because they believe that they're doing something for that God that they've created.
Right.
And then when they meet the actual God of the Bible and see that their zealousness falls short, it's going to be twice as offensive for
Right.
them.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, are you kidding me? I did all that. right? And so the one that was like openly immoral and just openly rebellious, he pretty much expected what he was getting. His conscience reacted every time he did that. Maybe every time he, used the Lord's name in vain in some kind of crazy way, in a public way, maybe he had some reaction in his conscience. Maybe even got chills doing it, when he did that. But then the religious person, that conscience is working to deceive him, and it keeps him going. And he's, he's sowing, so to speak. He's sowing his seed of establishing righteousness of his own, and he thinks he's going to reap at the day of judgment.
Establishing their own righteousness by themselves with their obedience.
Yeah.
They think that by their obedience they can establish their own righteousness.
So then they come to judgment and they find out different when they offer their plea, and it's quite shocking, no doubt, about it. Even though some people down here might have told them during their lifetime. But you know what? It doesn't really matter if they've ever heard that or not. They can't understand it. That's the point. And that's God's sovereignty. He's the one that gives understanding or withholds. He's never going to give it to the non-elect, ever. Even at judgment. I mean, they're going to realize, all right, I got my answer. That didn't work. I can't figure it out. I don't know why. And then they'll spend the aggravation psychologically, however that works. And they're either going to be, it's not funny, but I heard somebody the other day on video said, if I end up going to hell, there's two types. There is a gnasher of teeth, and there's a weeper. He said, I'm going to be a weeper. That was awful humble of him. But anyway, this idea of finding out you were not right, and then being rejected, and then dealing with that after that, you would think it would cause either gnashing of teeth or weeping. I mean, it's not good. In your mind, like trying to figure it out. Like, what? I don't get it. I thought I did what I was supposed to do. Just no understanding. There will never be an understanding for them. All right. This is kind of a different question. I'm not going to say it's not theological, because I think everything is kind of doctrinal theological. And it's one that he probably, the one that just left to go to the restroom, it's probably the one he wanted to hear, because me and him talk about this stuff. He asks me a lot about these type things. But is it okay for a believer to disobey the civil authorities if the law, the rule, or the policy violates their conscience? Is it okay for a believer to disobey civil authorities if the law, rule, or policy violates their conscience? Now, we could talk about this all day. I don't want to. I mean, there's more important things to talk about all day. I promise. And you guys know I think that way. But this is not important. I think it's important. It has to be dealt with. And I think people already have thought about this and have enacted certain things in their own lives that's related to this question. And one I can think of that is connected to something that started like 3 years ago. Some policies and some rules that they tried to put on people. And some people said, nope, not going to do it. I'm not going to wear that mask. I'm not going to get that shot. And everything connected to it. And then some people would say, don't you follow the law? I mean, you could bring in other things like things concerning abortion. Then you're going to bring in all kind of other things like, okay, so should the believer vote, right? Should he register to vote? And you start to bring in all those things. So what are some examples? I brought up the thing that you can only use certain words on certain platforms or you get your video taken off. But any examples of some things that, what about some biblical examples? What about Old Testament examples? What about those three guys that had the weird names that refused to bow? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They said, no, I ain't going to do it. They took the furnace, they heated it up 7 times hotter than before. The guy opening the door to put him in there, if I remember right, it consumed him. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got put in there. And then in amazement, people are looking and say, there is a fourth one in there, likened to the Son of Man. And it was the one protecting them. Pre-incarnate Christ there, as we see in some other spots in the Old Testament. But there's the example of the rejection of the law in that country. And it was about idolatry. They said, I'm not going to follow idols. I'm going to do it. And I can't remember where this text is. It says we should obey God rather than man, somewhere in the New Testament. I'm sure it's kind of a repeat from the Old Testament. But here we were into this question, Charles. Is it okay for a believer to disobey the civil authorities if the rule, the law, or the policy violates their conscience?
Yes. Better to obey God than man.
Right. We gave a few examples: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and what kind of happened 3 years ago in this country that shut the country down. And people reacted differently. Some church buildings were shut down by the government, and I know with us, we were meeting in a government facility. It was a school. We had no choice. We couldn't get in. And so we came and met here, which nobody had a problem with. But, some churches defied the law, and they went ahead and met, and they had threats of lawsuits and different things like that. So any other examples, anything you can think of, maybe kind of extraordinary that maybe we haven't thought of? I'll say this, and we can touch on this another time. When it comes to the basis for this in the first place, Romans 13, obeying the powers that be, my view of that is way different than anybody that I know. Any of the pastors I hang out with, we're probably not going to agree on what it means. And I can talk about that another time. I know I've talked about some of it with you guys. But getting back to the more precise thing, this thing of liberty of conscience, even when it comes to, it can even enter into Romans 14 in Christian liberty, right? But having said that, I think we got to connect the two, and I think it makes sense that Paul wrote one chapter right after the other, because 13 talks about the conscience in what we're talking about here that has to do with the powers that be, and then the conscience in the Christian life dealing with one another. And he instructs in both. So those things will have to be thought of in those contexts. Now, liberty of conscience, for example. I'm not even talking about, interpretation of texts when it comes to practical things. I'm not even talking about that. Liberty of conscience when it comes to health stuff. I mean, in our articles of faith, the last section has to do with the liberty of conscience when it comes to God's people not bowing to the authority of someone else that would violate our conscience on anything in our Christian life, our health, or anything else. So we have that in our articles of faith, if anybody wants to look at that. But it's related to this question. We could beat this thing to death. I'm going to end on this next question, and it's kind of a three-parter, and I don't think we're going to have time to look at all three parts, because this could really expand. And some of this I'm going to deal with in the 1 John series, because it deals a little bit with the Trinity. Here it is. This is the first part of the question. And I didn't ask detailed, nuanced, distinct things like, what do you mean by that word, what do you mean, this could mean this, that, and the other. But here it goes. If all the Trinity was involved in raising of Jesus from the dead, is it referring to the humanity side of Jesus? And I think he means that raised from the dead, the humanity side of Jesus that raised from the dead. Now, first, let's look at the first part. I mean, there's probably a lot of people, I don't think here, but listening on video, that are probably not used to this idea of when you talk about the Trinity doing certain things. A lot of times people say, no, just this person of the Trinity did this and not this. And that is true in some cases. But the resurrection, I tell you, if you look it up, you'll find where you'll find it in different parts of Scripture where it talks about the Father raising, the Son raising, and the Spirit raising in different places. You'll see that. You'll see that about creation, too. Look at the early part of Genesis. Let us create man in our own image. And then you get more distinct, where Christ himself, it's seemingly a delegation to Christ to be the one, to speak because he's the Word of God, to speak things into existence. John 1:1, Hebrews 1, first couple verses of Hebrews, and Colossians 1. These three texts together talk about Christ doing the creating. Well, we know Christ is God. And where it says, let us, in Genesis, this is God, and the agreement is Christ is going to do it. And we know the verse up there says that in all things he might have preeminence. That's part of it too, right? He's put out in preeminence in creation, right? And all these things. So, in other words, yes, the whole Trinity is involved in raising up Christ. Even the divinity of Christ raising up himself. What did he say? He said, I got the power to lay it down, take it up again, right? I got this commandment and received that of my Father. So, yes, the whole Trinity is involved. And so the second part of the question, is it referring to the humanity side of Jesus? I guess that means in reference to the resurrection. Yes. Is there any other way to interpret that last part? So, in coming to that last part, I'm sure people could bring questions in, right? Did God die, right? That's a typical question. And there is a part 2 here. I'll just go to it. And again, we could really expand here, and I want to kind of save, because we're going to deal with a lot of Trinitarian stuff in 1 John, because remember, one of the problems in 1 John was the false gospel of the people that left, saying Christ really didn't have a body. So it enters into this idea of, what humanity really is, how is sin transferred, and all these different questions about the person of Christ that's not to be divorced from his work. Prior to here's the second part. Prior to the incarnation, and I'm reading this exactly the way it was sent to me, the second person, referring to Christ, was spiritual, and a body was created for him. That's a statement, end of sentence. At his death of his humanity, in brackets, at his death, the second person left the body? That's the question. So I take it that this question refers to the human spirit of Christ left him when he died. Now, here's a verse I just added. I don't have any notes on this, but I just added this verse so I wouldn't misquote it. Luke 23:46. And crying with a loud voice, Jesus said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he breathed out the spirit. He expired. He died. He breathed out his spirit. So I think gave up the ghost, King James, probably. This is modern King James. So when you start, first of all, the first part, prior to the incarnation. So we look at the eternality, the eternal word, John 1:1-3. The eternal word that always was. So we started last week a Wednesday night thing with some people that aren't even members. Charles came, but there's some people that are not even members of the church. We're giving them some doctrinal stuff, trying to, preach the gospel. And so we started talking about monotheism versus polytheism. One God versus multiple gods. Then we talked about Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And then the second part was the person of Christ. One person, two natures, divine, human. And we just kind of shotgun blasted all those things. We're going to come back and do a deeper layers of these things. So prior to the incarnation, in other words, the incarnation is God taking on flesh or adding a fleshly body. Prior to that, he was only spiritual. He was only spirit, in other words. He didn't have a body, in other words. He was only spirit, eternally. What's it say in John? What is it for? God is spirit. Those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. So before Bethlehem, or the conception of Christ in Mary's womb, before Bethlehem, before that, God never had a body. So the incarnation is him taking on flesh, right? And added human nature to a divine nature, which didn't change God. It was something in his purpose. That was purpose for him to do so that he could be like his people that he's substituting and representing. And we know there's a difference in that setup there, in that he bypassed sin. And that's what we're going to be talking a lot about in 1 John. And so there was a body created for him. So we know, the virgin birth, the seed came from the Spirit and planted in Mary, and so on. And he was born, sinless humanity. And we know the humility that he experienced on purpose. He humbled himself, came in the form of a servant, set aside his reputation as God, and we see that there was a temporary subordination to the Father in his humility and dwelling here on earth among sinners to perform his purpose in saving his people. And so he was one person, two natures, both God and man. And when he died, we know he was one person. That's the point. So we can't be talking about Christ as two persons. I forget the name of that heresy. It's some kind of heresy that some people hold to. It's one person, two natures. So when we talk about this person that died, it's the one that we're talking about, right? And in his person makeup is the two natures. And deity can never die. Otherwise it wouldn't be deity. So yes, his humanity died. It was prophesied that it would happen. It had to happen. And we see where he laid it down and he took it up again. So there's way more detail there. But yeah, his, I think we were reading not too long ago about the spirit of man in reference to an understanding, conscious awareness, consciousness, alive, understanding, a will, and so on. This activity of live people, what they do, right? And so there's a point in time where this person that's doing this activity finished the activity. That's why he came to die. And made the announcement, it's finished. It's enough to do what is sufficient to save all his people and establish a righteousness. And so he said it is finished, and he laid down his life. He gave up the ghost because law and justice has been satisfied. That was his goal. And then he died, and he was in the grave for 3 days, 3 nights. He resurrected, which was really a signification of the Father. It was according to the promise of God. You're not going to see corruption. You're going to be raised. There was like no chance that it wasn't going to happen. Just like there's like no chance that Christ was not going to sin. He's impeccable. He's not going to sin. So this purpose, this predestination is rolled out in time and made manifest through a bunch of means. And he fulfills the purpose through the promises and the prophecies in real time. And we see it all through Scripture. And it's completely successful. No questions in any part of it, of any failures. It's all perfect. And he comes out on the other side, not just resurrected, but ascended and exalted, higher than anyone in any age to come. Which I think is kind of, to try to think about this like 1,000-year millennial reign over in this city, over in this town, this Jerusalem place, is like, a lot of people are planning for that. No. He's as high as he's going to get. And what's next, he's going to come back and destroy everything and bring his people, and we're going to start all over. And we're going to have a body like his, which his body after his resurrection was not the same in reference to there's no more suffering, there's no more dying, there's no more pain, and so on. It is one that lasts forever. We've already gone past an hour. Any follow-ups on some of that? We could expand. Actually, there's a third part, and we didn't get to it, of that question. Anything to add to that before we eat?